Welcome to the third annual Wisdom of Practice lecture. My name is Kurt Stange. I'm a family and public health physician. I've been in Cleveland for just 37 years, and I'm on the faculty at Case Western Reserve University. And I'm here to introduce our speaker and to provide two items of context. The first item of context is relevant for both people that are live streaming and in the room, and that is that it's socially acceptable anytime during Dr. Lynch's lecture or the question and answer at the end to get up and get food. So if you're at home, feel free. If you're in the room, feel free. And we have really good food, including nice baklava here, and I'm sorry if you're not here, but just on live stream to get that. The second context is why we're here and what the Wisdom of Practice lecture is. It's actually part of an initiative that's supported by the University Suburban Health Center Foundation. And those of you who are local know that the Green Road practice, the University Suburban Health Center as it's often called, has been a kind of a stalwart medical practice in Cleveland for a long time. When they sold their practice to University Hospitals a few years ago, they kept aside a little bit of money to try to do something with, and one of the things they did is supported an initiative called the Wisdom of Practice Initiative, and that has four aspects. The first is the lecture. They have actually endowed this lecture in perpetuity, so this lecture is endowed to keep on going. The other three things that they did is a project that's looking at medical students and looking at how medical students see the future of healthcare and their place in that future. A paper was just published on that, and students are being interviewed now this coming year for a fourth time, and we're looking at how that changes over time. The second part is are some oral histories that are now being posted online that Robin Gottler is interviewing people about their life course. And if you're just starting off in practice, it's really helpful to get a sense of what people find what was meaningful in their practice as they look back on things. So those things are available. And the third part is we're doing ethnography of practice. We're talking to patients and clinicians, doing some observations of practice, trying to look at what really makes a difference in caring for patients. And a particular hook on that, the University Suburban Health Center has been an independent practice. And the doctors there had a sense that there's something different when you have a practice that's really run from the top down by a large system. And so they're trying to give voice to what might happen if you have some autonomy in practice as you do in private practice. Kenneth Q, who's on our board, and Ricky Tom, who's on our advisory board for this, with Lily White and other people, just had a session they've done for the last 3 years for students and others that are interested in concierge and direct primary care practice as a way that you can have time with your patients. So that's the context for what's going on here. We're really delighted that we have Johanna Lynch here, by far the furthest away lecturer. She's come from Queensland in Brisbane, Australia. I met Johanna a few years ago when I got an email from a general practitioner in Australia that I'd written a paper with, but had never actually met in person. There was another author. She got the two of us working together on a paper. We emailed but had never talked. And she said, would you be willing to be an examiner for a PhD of one of my students? And in Australia, like a few European countries, you can actually get a PhD in general practice. But unlike how we do PhDs in the US, where you do it right out of school, you have to go out and learn something first. So people tend to do these PhDs after a decade or more in practice. And so it was a tremendously, I thought, pressure-packed setup. They had myself, another examiner from Norway. We weren't supposed to talk to the candidate. We weren't supposed to talk to each other. She was at 11 p.m. in Australia to accommodate our time, and she was in a room with someone that she didn't really know, but who was just there to detect the technical things. We're supposed to listen to her defense, have read her doctorate dissertation, and say yes, no, does she get to graduate? And she's worked on this for years. What a high-pressure situation. And so with the Norwegian examiner and I, we violated the rules and contacted each other, and I said to her by email, I said, I've never done this before. I think I'm going to recommend we accept this PhD without any changes. And like, that never happens. I mean, it's like this thick. And she said, I've never done that before. I'm going to recommend the same thing. And the reason we did that is that just in even the background section, Dr. Lynch showed just such a deep personal understanding about what it means to be a personal physician for people and for communities. And I just read that and I said, it's really hard to articulate this stuff. And she did it magnificently. And then her practice, and she's going to tell you a little of her personal story as well, her practice really focused on people that have suffered a lot of traumas in their lives. And working with those patients, she identified how important sense of safety is. She said that's actually a fundamental part of being in general practice, about being a generalist, taking care of people, that you need to understand what helps people to feel safe, and you need to help in your practice to help them to feel safe. So she really showed in this dissertation a deep understanding about what it means to be a personal physician, and identified this concept that I see some of the practicing physicians nodding when I said that. You say, of course, but it's not something that we really have typically taught as part of what it means to be in practice. So since then, I kind of glommed on and get to Zoom with her about once a month in the years since then. I have learned a lot from Dr. Johanna Lynch, who's our third Wisdom Practice lecturer. So please welcome her. She'll talk, and then we'll have some time for discussion afterwards.
Thank you. Well, thank you. It's such an honor to be with you here and to know that you've given aside a special evening to come tonight. I'm really thankful for all of your presence. And of course, thankful to my PhD examiner. To those of you who are going to do PhDs in the future, choose your examiners carefully. Choose kind, wise ones. I'm hoping that this lecture delivered to you by someone from the other side or underside of the world will inspire you and encourage you and remind you of what matters to you and to your patients. Sometimes in the competing complexities of working in health, we can lose sight of ourselves and what matters to our communities and our own souls. And so I hope today we can reflect together on the deep and wide vision of health. For those in the rooms who come from fields outside health, can I encourage you to modify what I say for your unique setting? I'm going to bring you stories from a different medical system, from one that's upside down in many ways, not just geography. And I'm going to bring you stories from the past, and I hope that they will encourage you as we go through. So I actually thought we might start with a story that comes from within you. And I have a question for you. Can you imagine a time when you were making your decision to choose to become a doctor? And I'm wondering if you want to, you can close your eyes, you can just look into the distance. If you can remember where you were, what physical location were you in? And can you sense and see and hear what the sounds that were around you? Who was there? And what were you thinking and feeling at that time? Were there other people in the story that are really important to you that were back there at that time? I'm wondering if you can reach back in time towards yourself. What did the younger you want? What did they value? What were their dreams? And just rest for a while back there with them. Can you think of a couple of words to describe the vision of that younger you that you had back then of what it was to become a doctor? Just a couple of words to remind yourself. And just take a couple of breaths to be with that younger you. As I was preparing for this lecture, thinking especially about the private practice element that's part of this endowed lecture, I realized that the heart of private practice is about the personhood of the clinician. And it's filled with these personal things, our dreams, our visions, our quiet decisions, some made a long time ago. And so throughout this lecture, I hope that you can remember that person from years ago, that younger you. And after this lecture's over, can I encourage you to go and find a photograph of yourself? I've got one in this story to show you of me. And just reflect with yourself of all the things that have happened in the intervening years between that decision and now. If I answer this question for myself, there's a quirky answer. My heart wanted to be a nurse. Back then, as an 18-year-old, my idealism thought that the best thing about being a nurse would be to be able to bring bunches of flowers to people's bedsides and cheer them up. I see that now as my desire to be an encourager. And I also had soul inspiration from what I call the ancient wisdom literature of Isaiah. That's been a deep guide to my journey about choosing to bind up the brokenhearted and comfort those who mourn. That fresh-faced teenager has since learnt that it's not my job to bind up and free and release and comfort and provide for all, but I do want to be part of the kind of healing that this brings in communities. So I hope this lecture is like a bunch of flowers to you. Sometimes the choice to do medicine comes out of our own mourning and broken-heartedness too. Do you know what I mean? Our own stories, our strengths, our weaknesses, our wounds and our gifts, our obsessions and their antidotes, they become the road we travel on. This is a cartoon from an Australian poet and cartoonist who opens his book with a quote saying that love is like bread. It needs to be made fresh every morning. So tonight we'll be reflecting on growing in our capacity to love daily as we walk our own roads. My own story is one of being a nomad from my early life. I was born in Ireland. I grew up till I was 7 in Uganda when a dictator came to power. My father flew us from Uganda to Australia, that's that dotted line around the Indian Ocean, over 40 days when I was 7. And I did some of my primary school in the north, hot parts of Queensland, some of it in Kenya, some of it in Indonesia. So I did grade 8 in 3 continents, I say. And I had to help my parents adjust to the various culture shocks they had in their new homes. These complex, beautiful and painful experiences have given me a mixed blessing. They have made me almost obsessed with including those who are marked as outsiders or ignored and left out of care. They have moulded me. And so I wonder if you could reflect for yourself, what complex gifts have you been given to help on your journey of becoming the kind of doctor you're going to be? So a little bit of my career journey. I completed my medical training in 1992. I had a month in the south of India as part of that training, learning about community development. And after my internship, I worked in London in the winters and travelled in the summers in a combi van. And I worked in an emergency department in the north of London in a scary month as a medical officer, and 5 months as a psychiatric house officer. And I returned home to do general practice or family medicine training, which I finished in 2003. I worked in a one-doctor practice, I've forgotten back there. I worked in a one-doctor practice, which is the one in the middle, on Wednesday afternoons when the doctor went to be at the racetrack. I worked in 3 different small clinics and a country clinic as part of my training, ranging in size from 2 doctors to 8 doctors. And after intentionally choosing to work in my own neighbourhood, I finally settled into a clinic 10 minutes from home that was actually 2 private practices sharing the same receptionist. Each of these clinics were a little quirky, operating out of slightly run-down buildings or small shopping centres, and they were full of heart and personalised care from the receptionist, nurse and family doctor. We knew our patients well back then. And in those places, I learnt to see wisdom underneath ordinary humour, pragmatic clinical decisions and care. And as I look back at these, the most dodgy-looking building was the one with the most heart. Throughout these years, I've had some time off, one time with a broken leg after trying ice skating for the first time. And I worked part-time around the birth of my children, including having twins 8 weeks premature. Later, I navigated the difficulties of being a clinician mother who identified a rare lung condition in my eldest and then one of my twins, but doubted my clinical decision-making to assess that as a mother. And they both ended up needing oxygen at home, one for 6 months, one for 12 months. I reduced my working hours around caring for my children, something I have never regretted. And for those of you who are women here, I say to remember our bodies and our hearts travel through different seasons that we don't get back. And so make sure you stay true to yourself in each of those seasons. During those seasons, I needed my employers who shared my values and enabled me to practice in a way that did not harm my home. I look back and really value those clinician leaders who cared for me as well as they did their patients, and they actually prioritised my needs over the business's needs. I do remember, though, that one of my bosses asked me if his wife could care for my children so I could come back to work at one stage. So I wonder what life experiences you have had that have moulded your availability to be a doctor. Have you had supportive clinicians around you who understood you and your values? When I teach about medical careers, I speak about little steps of integrity adding up to a lifetime of being yourself and who you were made to be. When I teach them, I ask them, what kind of doctor do you want to become? What little steps of integrity are you currently making? In the midst of this work as a family doctor, I started to see people cycling in and out of mental health hospitals, gathering diagnoses and prescriptions. I think you might know what I mean. And often, as a woman, we have what in Australia we call the tears and the smears, which take longer and often are paid less well. I didn't know it then, but I was using a family doctor skill to notice patterns across the whole person. I was doing what I found myself calling ordinary GP listening, and I heard story after story of childhood maltreatment in the lives of these patients. I started to learn what trauma was, and I in fact love the Greek definition of that word trauma. It means wound. And so looking at trauma not as a psychiatric diagnostic criteria that was designed at the Vietnam War era, the PTSD kind of diagnosis, but actually looking at what causes wounds to humans. And these are some of the descriptions written by therapists, by people working in neurodevelopment, and I think they're much more helpful to us than some of the ways that psychiatry has diagnosed. In fact, probably more, we could say, insurance and legal definitions of what happens to humans than what healers need to know. Healers need to know what has happened to someone's safety with other people in their life story. I also found during this, a little bit came out of my research, to look for not just a violation that often we would look for when we think of the word trauma, but anything that affects someone's sense of their physical or moral integrity, anything that impacts their sense that the world is coherent and that they can understand it. And that's where some of the more subtle forms of human hurt can happen, where we betray one another and confuse one another, and that's where the word gaslighting has now come into our culture. And then the last one, anything that causes disconnection, because we're such mammalian beings and we need one another. I also started to be really connected to the social determinants of health and see them as another pattern that happens to my patients, impacting each of them. And the idea that stress can be something that's healthy when we do something new, but it also can be something that's toxic, biologically toxic, and leaves what some people call a biological signature on someone's life. And that human relationships are what change stress from being toxic to tolerable. I saw this sense that the things that get diagnosed in psychiatric understanding of trauma are really just the tip of an iceberg that's much deeper in our communities. And people get more than invaded and violated. They become exploited and dominated in forms of control that are also often so subtle we cannot see them. They can have ongoing adversity which has just become normal for them as part of life. But that communicate to them that it's not safe, that there is no safe home or community to belong to. And lastly, the one that's often the hardest to treat is the emotional neglect that leaves someone with a sense that they're not worth caring for. These are the patients that don't bring themselves to medical help, that often feel so ashamed they cannot tell us the things that are hurting them, and are used to being treated as the outsider. And so these bring in some of the things that we know hurt our patients in a more coherent way of understanding them. As a GP in Australia, these patterns the patients that have these kinds of things could access free care with me as a general practitioner with government support. They couldn't afford other care, and at that time in 2005 there was no other trauma psychotherapy in my community available to them. And so that led me to undertake further training in grief and loss, trauma, attachment and association, so that I could expand my scope of practice to care for them. I went outside of the limits of my profession to learn for the sake of my patients, and I also chose to earn less so that they could have access. The capacity to make these choices would have been denied me in a larger commercial organisation. Ian McGuinness says that family doctors will innovate because they are so close to the need in their community. I think of us like early warning detectors, like the canary in the coal mine. We can detect shifts in needs in our communities, and we also need something around us, the logistics and capacity to be allowed to innovate in our care. And I think this is a particular gift of private practice. A key help to me at that time was a survivor-led organisation now called Blue Knot Foundation, and a US organisation called the International Society for the Study of Trauma and Association. My patients, though, were my main teachers. They taught me from the inside out. And later I would learn from healing from drama therapists and music therapists and mental health nurses and social workers in attachment and domestic and family violence. And I think a mature clinician is one who becomes transdisciplinary by adding knowledge to their profession of origin for the sake of patient care. Do you agree? This learning led me on an uncomfortable journey of creating new pathways for this patient group. It also led me back to myself and towards falling back in love with generalist ways of seeing people as whole, interconnected beings. One of my friends described me as a refugee from fragmented medical care. Initially, I asked my GP boss if I could change to doing longer appointments, a change that would lower both of our incomes. He graciously allowed me to do that. Then, in response to a particularly lonely patient who wouldn't go to anyone else I referred her to, I dreamed of running my own little clinic where I could take her down the hallway and introduce her personally to people who could care for her beyond what I could. And so this led to me renting a little tiny house one summer holiday where I could do this. I took her down the hallway and introduced her to a mental health nurse who taught her how to use her mobile phone and took her to the ballet and took her to beading, crafting organisations and led her to be able to host other people having a morning tea in this building. It led me also to my own safety. I could choose a location where my children could walk home from school to this building, and I could choose my hours and set them around my school hours rather than session times, which I'd been limited to prior to that. And so, in a way, running my own clinic led me to be the kind of mother I wanted to be as well. And it provided healing for my patients and for the other clinicians who came to work there. One of my patients, the one on the bottom right there, spoke at the opening, and she used to be a seamstress before she became really unwell, and she made herself a purple suit for the day, and she gave me one of the best compliments I've ever had, which was, "Thank you for giving my children back their mother." Earlier in our journey, when I was caring for her, she said these words to me. And these words changed me, actually. They helped me to see that the way I saw a person could help them in a way that all the psychiatric care she'd received over decades had not been able to help. She later actually got a kayak and became a sea kayaker and came back to see me years later, a different person and so well. But this way of seeing became a little bit of an obsession. And I found myself accidentally writing a paper trying to define how GPs see differently to psychiatrists when we're trying to understand a person, and that we should respect our way of seeing as something, a unique gift to the community, something that we need to value and see as precious. I also started asking new assessment questions inspired by my trauma training, where the first idea was establishing safety being the most important element of trauma care. And this is a new question I found myself asking of someone I'd known for about 3 years. And I knew things weren't safe at home, but I didn't know that school wasn't safe until she answered it like this. So that question asking about the strength of finding where she might feel safe, she actually chose a place that many children don't feel safe on a school bus. And so I learnt so much from that one question. Personally, I was also becoming uncertain of my work. I no longer was a mainstream family doctor, and I was not a psychologist or a psychiatrist. I felt like an outlier and questioned the validity of my work. And this uncertainty led me back to do a PhD. And during those years, I maintained my clinical practice just 1 day a week, doing that PhD full time. As well as innovating proactively, I know that I was also fleeing fragmented practice where mental health is disconnected from life story, relationships, meaning, and body. And I was running towards what I later learned was whole person care. Sometimes I joke with my children that I would like to have a secret superpower that surprises people when they think they're just in the presence of a middle-aged, boring lady. And secretly, I'd love to be able to go bam and do a backflip. Well, that's not going to happen. But instead of a physical backflip, I will use the last few minutes of this talk to show you the innovation that was nurtured within my working context of private practice. I could not have changed my clinical practice and closed clinical hours to do doctoral research without a medical system flexible enough to allow me to choose hours, payment, length of appointments, and style of practice. This has cost me too. There's a cost to the freedom to innovate. There's a cost to the question, to be able to question the status quo, to stay being ourselves. Private practice has enabled me to decide to earn less for the sake of something bigger. It allowed me to use all of me, my analytical brain, my sensing body, my idealistic heart. I wonder if you have your own secret superpower waiting to be unleashed. I think that biomedicine has an Achilles heel. And so I'll move now into a little bit of the innovation that has come from my work. It has these beautiful, amazing things which lead to amazing science. I'm wearing hearing aids that have made me be able to hear because somebody was able to do precise, objective, predictive work. So I do not at any time want to denigrate biomedicine. I just want to point out it has an Achilles heel. And the very things that make it amazing accidentally make it have a wound that can hurt us when we're trying to do this work. It has a focus on precision, which can become too narrow and can lose our sense of the whole. It can make us talk in different dialects across the specialist systems and make us unable to respect and see one another. It has a focus on objectivity, which can mean we're blinded to the beautiful subjectivity of people, community, and culture. And it has a focus on prediction. It becomes deterministic, losing sight of the movement, change, and growth that are part of healing. And in fact, Viktor Frankl says this determinism means you cannot see triumph out of tragedy when you see in this way. These deeply good things have a downside. Precise, objective predicting, this is almost the opposite of personalized care. Care for the person includes precise biomedical knowledge mixed in with imperfect, uncertain subjectivity, relationships, meaning-making, and turning towards suffering, lending hope, and turning our rudders away from the certainty of prediction towards healing. My research has become a theoretical framework with its own ordinary language, sense of safety. It's built on foundational theories, some of which you may recognize. And these theories cross disciplinary boundaries. This is one of the things I found about trauma. Trauma, because it happens to all of us and it impacts the whole person, it is actually a teacher about how we see whole people. These theories show us the centrality of safety to physiological health and social health. They are transdisciplinary, and they are part of understanding across ways of understanding conversations around what is well-being. I asked multidisciplinary clinicians in my research a key question, and I'm going to ask you to reflect on this question too for a moment and see what your answer to it is. What do you think the phrase sense of safety means? What does it mean to you? You think of a few sentences in your mind. This is what we found in our work. I wonder if you can see what we found in this research. What we found surprised us, actually. You'll be happy to know, Will. Surprised us with the sense that in almost all the descriptions, people mentioned themselves, somebody else, and their context. And they were trying to name something that they noticed across the whole of them, and they were sensing something inside that brought all of those aspects together. They noticed not just those things as things, but also the relationships between them, the dynamics between them. So the self and the other was how connected and how safely connected do I feel in that relationship between self and context? How capable do I feel to engage with my context? And it was this an appraisal of their capacity to cope, as well as who was there with them, that as well as what was going on in that context, that deeply influenced whether they felt safe. And so accidentally, this language itself was ordinary. It's part of everyday use. And that was a gift it gave us, that it also helped us to notice the whole. It helped the patient to tell us what was going on in their whole self, including their context and relationships. We then mapped the nouns or the content that was in the data about what causes threat and how do you sense that you're safe. And out of that came these domains that became a way of thinking about the whole person, a new kind of systems review built on a trauma-informed approach, trying to notice how safe people felt in their environment. And often people mentioned things like injustice, finances, policing, political stability, as well as ordinary things like food and water security. And social climate was where they lived and learnt and worked, what was going on there, how much hopelessness and poverty and aggression and addiction were in those spaces. And then in their personal relationships, who was there, who was missing, what kind of relationships were they? Were they with you and on your side, and did they have your back? And then in the body, not just things we notice in illness when we search for diagnoses in the body, but ordinary things like sleep and pain and big emotions, thinking of emotions as a biological, bodily message trying to tell us something useful rather than as a form of disorder is central to this model. Then inner experience, not just thoughts, but visions, perceptions, what we pay attention to, what we dream about, what our nightmares are. And then sense of self. My definition of sense of self that I love is your reputation with yourself. And so what attitude do you have towards yourself? How do you communicate to yourself? How much self-hatred is there? How much ignoring of yourself is there? And then meaning and spirit. What sort of makes you make sense of yourself in the big, wide, beautiful world? And then came from that a re-looking at the data, looking at the verbs. So determined in this model not to ignore movement, not to ignore things that change and growth. And amazingly found things we didn't expect to find. So I thought just before we move on to that, can I just show you on your there's a little gift pack there for you. And one of them is for you to reflect on your own sense of safety. The next one is some questions that you might ask a patient about their sense of safety. Then there's a reflection on your well-being. What do you do in each of the areas of these dynamics I'm about to mention are part of your life already, or could you be building into your life a bit more? And then the last one is a poem, which I encourage you not to read at this stage, but it's a gift for you. So the dynamics of healing became central to the ideas of this work, that whenever we're with a patient, there's these processes going on that are part of how they sense safety. And that we do them often without knowing. So when we distract someone by deciding to do a blood pressure at an awkward point in the conversation because we know they need to calm down, we're doing broad awareness. We're helping them to come back into the room and be with us. When we use a sense of humour, we're helping them connect across different bits of their brain. The neurobiology of knowing that two things don't quite mix with one another makes it funny. And you need to be aware of more than just a straight, narrow, frightened pathway to be able to laugh. And so these things that we think of as just, the sidebar of our work, maybe they're central to our work, maybe they're part of our craft, maybe they are something we can deeply value. So I often would say to someone, if you're deciding to not prescribe something that's in the guidelines, and you're choosing to do that because you know that prescribing will make your patient feel that they're not capable to live, then you're choosing the deeper healing task of helping them stay feeling capable by not prescribing. And so it's like a deeper plan for our care that we're naming here. So broad awareness is that sense of noticing myself and other people and the wider world. And yes, it is things like mindfulness and mentalizing, where we're aware of somebody else's inner experience being different to our own. It's a kind of reflective function. There's also connection to nature and looking at art and enjoying the breeze, these beautiful things that are part of being a human. Respectful connection is the way we relate to ourselves and to other people, and the way we let the sort of environments we're in. It's a reciprocal way of being in the world. A calm sense-making is something we do internally to regulate our emotions and understand our own stories. It's what we do in conversations with other people to dialogue and understand something. It's what we do in groups when we have celebrations or rituals that mark an important event. So this calm sense-making is something we do in the ordinary routines of our medical care, with the way that the place the patient knows to sit will be the same seat available next time, and the little routines of how we welcome them into the room and what they know will happen in that room. And capable engagement is that sense of always wanting them to know they can engage with their world more safely. So those are the subtle ways we build them up rather than look down upon them in our work, and the ways we call ourselves to be beside them. And then owning themselves or yourself. Just a reminder to those of us who are medical, sometimes we forget our patients are responsible for their own lives and their own choices, and they need each of the other elements to be able to do that. And then alongside that, this is the first time anybody's seen this slide, is naming the analysis of later data collected with more multidisciplinary clinicians around what do we do as clinicians to enable the building of sense of safety in our work. And so there's these mirroring processes that when we are building broad awareness, we're valuing the whole picture. When we're trying to build respectful connection, we're being with our patients in how we are with them. When there's calm sense-making happening, we're holding story safely. When we're building capable engagement, we're learning together. And lastly, my favourite is when we're helping someone to own themselves. We are helping to protect their dignity in every move we make. And finally, the last piece of the model is this integration of it with Maslow's writing and some of his confessions later of an area of need that he hadn't noticed, which is self-transcendence. And finding that later paper or the writing about it helped me to then integrate it so that we could see it's not actually a hierarchy. That's been one of the critiques of Maslow's work. And that it's instead it's a whole person experience with these different goals, that this is what we want for our patients as they heal. They're safe enough to be in their environment, safe enough to belong to their communities, safe enough to connect in their intimate relationships. That their bodies are calm, that they are safe on the inside from their inner critique and ignoring they might have. They're safe enough to grow in their sense of self and safe enough to give in their spirit. So this sense of safety theoretical framework is intentionally pluripotent, and it's ready to be applied in multiple settings. It integrates social determinants, and it's embodied and evidence-based around how our physiology works. It's strength-based and recovery-oriented, and it integrates across the disciplines. It's a shared language. It's culturally respectful, and it brings in trauma and lived experience. These two websites are my websites where you can get a lot of these resources for free, and some of the research basis behind it as well. So I thought I'd end with two stories. One is a gift from a patient. The patient I mentioned at the start, who only felt safe on the school bus. And when I finished practice, she gave me a little bag with a few messages inside it. It's such a precious bag. Kurt said, "Bring the bag." I said, "No, I'm going to not bring the bag. I don't want to lose the bag." So it's such a precious bag. I've only shown you a picture. But in the first part, she gave me her farewell, and I'll just let you read that and get rid of this thing that's come up. And the second part is her gift to me, to tell me it's okay for me to stop doing clinical practice. She wanted me to be okay as I left her. And we were just talking this afternoon about how much our patients give us gifts in everyday practice, and how much their gifts help us to stay the practitioners that we want to be. My last story is about the writing of a poem in response to some data that we gathered, and I've been doing that with Kurt, and we did a question to a group of clinicians at the World Organization of Family Doctors in 2023, asking them, what's generalism and why do you enjoy being a GP? And that data has been difficult to analyze, and we realized that as we were analyzing it, we were looking at ourselves from outside. We were analyzing general practice or family medicine from the point of view of the system. In what way are we useful to the system? Well, we provide access. We care about equity. We offer comprehensive care. We offer continuity of care. These are the ways we're useful to the system. And we realize, actually, we're not very good at looking at this data from the point of view of our own hearts. Like, who are we? What matters to us? And in fact, we were sort of wrestling with our own dismissal of our own skills, not even noticing our complexity of why we do the work. And one of the writers in this space talks about us as beleaguered defenders of holism, empathy, and the complex understanding of the individual. So it's this sense of being a beleaguered defender that I think, as I was writing this, I got really overwhelmed with the data, kind of annoyed that I'd had to live through not understanding myself for all these 25 plus years of practice, and that we were not yet able to defend ourselves, describe ourselves, even to ourselves. And so this poem came out, and I might read it to you. And I hope it's a gift to you and a reminder of the dignity of your work. I'll just read it here. I actually want to rename it to being a love letter to generalism, or falling in love with generalism is kind of a new title. It's invisible when done well. It will be missed like a mother when it's gone. It's about seeing and knowing and caring about the past and now and then, even when it hurts. It's about taking on big, wide oceans of pain and shifting them by staying near. It's a wading in close, beyond the symptoms stranded on the shore. It's about a rudder set towards healing through challenging the status quo, knowing what works, and carving pathways to growing up and facing. It's about advocacy for the one, built on knowing the many well. It's about seeing a person behind the symptom or the smile. It's about prevention and palliation. It's about cells and communities. It's about justice and joy. It's about shifting in and out and roundabout in how we know. It's humble and kneels to bend power from control towards gift to come alongside. It lays down expertosis for honest uncertainty that sees ordinary strength and fun mixed in with pain and loss in lives lived well. It's about being a person, yes, a person, who is let in to a kind of miraculous gift a healer's window on the world. So I come back to the bunch of flowers. This is my hope for this evening, that our time together would inspire you, encourage you, and strengthen you to be who you are, for you, for your family, for your patients, for your community, to keep your work personal and innovative and full of healing care, like a bunch of flowers. Thank you.
Wow. I'm so glad that we're recording this. I want to go back and listen to that many times. There was so much depth to that. Thank you, Johanna.
You're welcome.
And Johanna's left us time for reflections or questions or anything, folks. I'll be the roving microphone bearer. And Paul's going to read off anything that comes in from the folks that are remote.
Yeah, wow, thank you so much. So as a GP who's only been practicing a year now on my own, I would really love to hear your perspective on how did you either maintain or find your integrity along the way? Were those like, once a year I do this, or like just curious to hear like how you, it sounds like you're very mindful about that.
I do think that the people around you who you love are part of how you do that. So maintaining that I'm just a person doing my work, this is not consuming me completely, although at times it did. I'm sure my family would say that. And in fact, when I looked over my life story, I thought, there's only a few patches of years where I wasn't studying something. But I think that's also part of who I am. You know, I'm very curious, and it's part of how GP has molded me as well, being a GP. There's also my spirit, so maintaining some disciplines around how I care for my spirit and how I look after my week in that way. So setting aside time in a week that's not for work, that's not allowing work in. And ordinary things like fun and play and making sure I stayed connected to my community, which is quite difficult when you work in your community. There has been some of my own little walking of boundaries there, where I'd meet someone in a social group who would suddenly turn up as a patient, and then how would I navigate that relationship, or the other way around. Meeting people in the shopping centre, my kids know, that's a patient because mum hasn't really introduced me, you know, my family know that that's part of life, of living in your community where you work, but that's been kind of an important part of my decision. That has cost at times, because you can get lonelier that way if you can't have friends who become your friendships and your patients get mixed up. And I think the other thing is staying open to learning from wiser people. So hence I think the research journey has been such a gift to me, to meet people around the world who've been thinking these thoughts before me, who've been writing about them, encouraging me by their words, and then to meet them personally is just such a joy. So I think that journey. And I think in my clinical work, I chose to have personal supervision from quite early on. Sometimes fortnightly, sometimes monthly, changing from different supervisors as I needed, different influences. And so that has also been a kind of a sounding board, somebody to question my decisions or question my motivations or pick me up on things earlier than they might have been. So I'd highly recommend personal supervision of some sort.
Tell us about a typical day in the office. How do patients find you? How do you find them?
Well, I was in the circumstance where I didn't want to advertise because I was already overloaded. And so I've not had to advertise, and in fact I hid that I was doing trauma care because I wanted the external of my building to be a place people could just walk into without feeling shame. And often those who have experienced neglect don't think that they're traumatic enough to require care, so they minimize their own experience and don't think that they're important enough to care for if you use the word trauma around them. And so it was a way of making sure that anybody could come in quietly to my office. And they told each other, so I had a lot of word of mouth communication that enabled people to get to me. Is that the whole question? Is there more to the question? No, I think that's right.
Hi, thank you very much for the talk. I have a question about sort of some of these techniques on dealing with trauma sort of assume that the traumatic event is over, and many of my patients continue to live in unsafe environments and continue to experience really traumatic events like during the course of our care. So how do you sort of approach talking about safety when like they're not safe?
Yeah. So two principles of that. One I learned from a lady called Christine Courtois, who's done some of the really seminal work on complex trauma. And she says that safety is always more important than story. And so establishing safety where someone lives is far more important than us talking about whatever happened. And in fact, as my clinical practice changed, initially I thought I needed to sit and listen to stories as witnessing as a kind of part of the healing process. Towards the end, I realized actually my task was to be really good at pattern recognition so they didn't have to retell their story. And so I could pick up the things around the story that we needed to work on without us having to touch it too closely. But those things that seem ordinary, like where you're living and how much money you've got in the bank, actually are the most important steps. And so I do agree with Maslow in a way that we don't want to talk about inner sense of self and your emotions and history if we haven't got the basics right. And I kind of remember a key story with this where I had a child brought in, a sort of early teenager, who was sleeping in the same bed as the same bedroom where her sort of fostered sibling had drowned in the pool, and so the empty bed of the foster sibling was there, and she was still expected to go to sleep in that bed. So to just know the details of ordinary life can make or break whether somebody's able to grow and heal and learn. And so we know that those who are traumatized struggle to concentrate at school, for example, struggle with language acquisition, reading, writing, when actually nothing's wrong with their minds. It's just that they can't concentrate because they've got other important, very important things distracting them. I hope that's enough. Yeah. So in other words, their housing and getting them away from their abusive partner is more important than any other thing at that time.
Johanna, how important do you think the sacrifices you've made along the way is to get into the depth that you've gotten to in your practice?
Well, I kind of wish I didn't have to do them. But I think they are part of me determining how important something is. So I guess choosing what matters. You have to pay the price, don't you, if you want to stay close to what you value. So I guess that would be how I'd answer that. I think unfortunately our systems don't value this kind of innovation, but I am thankful that at least I was in a system where I could take the risks and do it that way, which is not the case everywhere.
Anything else?
Thanks a bunch. Would you mind saying more about how you managed to select precision, objectivity, and prediction as the Achilles heel of good biomedicine?
I missed the first bit of that, Larry. Would I say more about how I...
Well, about the Achilles heel of good, not bad, but good biomedicine. How did you just say a little more about precision, objectivity, and prediction, and why those are the three you settled on?
Yeah, good question, Larry. Well, I actually had a very lovely conversation with Ron Epstein, who wrote Attending years ago when I was trying to play with these ideas. And he said to me, do not have a straw man in biomedicine. So don't make up a kind of medicine that you can easily cut down. Choose it at its best. And so that challenge came to me. And I guess I was then searching to see what it was that was making it difficult for me to see the whole person, and finding these, I guess, ways of being in the world. In some of my other talks, I talk about the gifts of biomedicine and the gifts of the social sciences. So biomedicine gives us these gifts, and the social sciences give us different gifts about understanding relationships and meaning, authenticity, participatory ways of knowing together with other people. But in the middle, there's something that I think generalists do. They bring these two types of knowledge together, and they are kind of complementary. So the social sciences, for example, highly values complexity, whereas biomedicine would like to reduce it so we can be so precise. The social sciences highly value values and culture and context, where the biomedicine needs to exclude those variables to be clear and know what it's working on. And so seeing that actually together they make a better whole, but that it's not just putting them side by side like a mixed method study, it's actually something integrative is happening between the two types of knowledge. And I often use the example of my patient's got high blood pressure, but their dog died yesterday, which is the most important thing to deal with. Somebody's got to make a decision in that moment. And there's a bringing together of these, the sort of objective measurement of the blood pressure and the subjective knowing of how much that dog meant to her, that it changes what we decide to do. Somebody gave me the challenge of coming up with a metaphor so I could get this message across more clearly. And I use a picture of a tree and say, what if humans are like a tree? What if our leaves of a tree are like the parts of us that are easy to measure? So in biomedicine, that's the symptoms and signs. In the social sciences, there's also objective things that people can be reduced to, like what happened to you, like you're a domestic violence survivor, or what behavior are you doing, you're distractible. And so these kinds of things we can measure on the outside are easier to see. Then there's a different type of knowledge that's in the roots of the tree, that if we're standing on the ground, we can be completely oblivious to their existence, unless we think of that kind of knowledge as data. And so the roots are going down into the earth of our environment, into our history, into the relationships that surround us. The trees are in a forest. They talk to one another underneath the ground through their roots. And there's this sense of a different type of knowledge that keeps this tree alive. And those who are gardeners know they care for that kind of part of the tree more than they do about what's going on in the leaves. And often what's in the leaves happens much later in the story than what's going on down in the roots. But in between the roots and the leaves, there's something other that's invisible in the trunk. It's moving all the time. We can't see it on the outside. It looks really just like a still thing, the trunk. But if we know inside there is the stress response system and our immune system and water and sunlight communicating backwards and forwards in the tree, there's also the person's sense of self and their spirit. And for those of us who are generalists, we care about all three parts of this tree. The what's we can see in the leaves gives us some parts of the pattern recognition. The what's in the roots helps us see another part. But then this third part, which is this moving, invisible, sensory thing that's happening inside the trunk, I think that's the kind of place where we're constantly learning how to tune into that. So thank you for that question, Larry.
Johanna, the first thing I wrote down when I realized I wanted to write down things you're saying, I wrote down little steps of integrity that add up to who you were meant to be. And I think you've shown us many steps of integrity that add up to who you were meant to be. And I think even more important than that, I think you've inspired us to pay attention to those little steps sorry, I didn't mean to darkness, those little steps of integrity that we can take every day that add up to who we were all meant to be. So thank you for that inspiration.
Thank you, Kurt. Thank you all.